So where will this conflict go from here? How likely is it that Israel will launch a ground offensive in Rafah? We spoke with the Foreign Affairs correspondent David Pratt and the Washington-based reporter Amy Mackinnon, who writes for Foreign Policy magazine. David, there have been airstrikes over the weekend in Rafah. Are you expecting at some point a ground assault?
I think the ground assault will inevitably happen. I don't think it's as imminent as many people suggest. I mean, listening to Israeli commentators over the last sort of 24 hours, many of them are pointing out, including Anselm Pfeffer, who's one of the defence correspondents at the daily newspaper Haaretz, has pointed out that if you look at the kind of military structure of the Israelis in Gaza at the moment, there's 5 combat brigades and 4 of them are tied up still fighting in Khan Yunis. They would need that entire contingent in order to launch an offensive on Rafah. It would take that number. And they've also, sort of demobilised a lot of reservists. They've moved certain units up to the border with Lebanon. So I don't think it's as imminent as people would suggest. But that hasn't stopped, as that commentator said, is Benjamin Netanyahu talking up, because that's for internal consumption in Israel itself. So it's coming, but it's not immediate. But in the meantime, of course, there's a lot of panic in Rafah amongst the population, understandably, given what they've experienced across Gaza. And, of course, they're looking to where they're going to be going. I mean, where will they move to?
We'll touch on that momentarily then. Let me just get Amy's reading of it. What's your assessment, Amy?
Well, I have to agree with David there. To expand on what he was saying about the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, you have to consider also the domestic Israeli political dimension to this. Netanyahu is the ultimate political survivor. He makes Boris Johnson look like an amateur. And he has a lot of considerations on his plate as well. His opinion polls are in the doldrums right now. And many expect that the moment that this war ends, Netanyahu's political career ends. So he has a vested interest in this war continuing, and also in driving home the message to the Israeli population that he will be the one to see this through to the end of its mission, which he has stated is the whole-scale eradication of Hamas. Now, plenty of commentators have said that that's impossible, that Hamas is as much as an ideology as well as it is a militant group, but that's something he's very keen to drive home to his public. And this also comes at a time when there's a split in the Israeli war cabinet, with some members now starting to speak out about maybe the better objective is to focus on getting those hostages back, and many questioning how you can get those hostages returned safely if you're determined to prosecute a war like this to the bitter end.
And David, you were talking about fear in Rafah, where people might go. What's it like in Rafah at the moment?
Well, the conditions are horrendous. It's the population of Rafah has I think it's grown fivefold. We've got half of Gaza's population crammed in there to this town. And the Israelis have said that that people will be given instructions as to move if and when that offensive actually happens. The IDF, the Israeli Defence Forces, have suggested that they would move them, or ask people to move to Al-Mawasi, which is only a few miles from Rafah. But to put this in some sort of context, John, that's a coastal strip, a tiny little slither of land, which apparently is about 6 miles square. One commentator was comparing it with the size of the main airport in Israel, Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv. That's how small it is. So the idea to move 1.4 million people there, with all the chaos, panic, and problems that would create, it's a big, big ask. And people are already panicking because the airstrikes, as you pointed out, are continuing. So it's a horrendous situation on a humanitarian level. And I think the Egyptians are getting very twitchy over the border. That's another factor here. The Egyptians have been moving a lot of tanks, armoured personnel carriers and troops up to the border to reinforce it. The last thing the Egyptians want is a decanting of Gaza's population onto their territory for a whole raft of reasons. And I gather they're engaged in negotiations with the Israelis about this at the moment. And the Israelis will have to convince the Egyptians that that is not going to happen. But I suspect an awful lot of people in Benjamin Netanyahu, the right-wingers, the hardcore people within his cabinet, would like nothing better than to decant the Palestinian population into Egypt.
And Amy, you were saying there may be a split in the Israeli leadership over this. Where is the US on it? What's the US's position here?
I would describe the position of US officials, Secretary of State Antony Blinken and President Joe Biden as one of kind of carefully calibrated exasperation with Benjamin Netanyahu. They have reiterated their steadfast support for Israel, Israel's right to defend itself. There is a substantial package of military aid for US, which is working its way of US military aid for Israel, working its way through the US Congress right now. So that support is steadfast, but there is definitely a lot of frustration and exasperation with the nature of this war, what Biden has described as indiscriminate bombing, the use of 2,000-pound bombs in heavily populated areas. And certainly the US is at the same time as supporting Israel's right to defend itself, is very keen to see this war brought to an end, also for its own domestic political calculations. It's an election year here. This war has been extraordinarily difficult for Biden to juggle amongst several of his constituencies here, with progressives, with Arab and Muslim voters extraordinarily upset about his position on this war. So they're trying to kind of thread the needle and juggle these two things all at once here.
And is there a fear that there might be an escalation, Amy, and where that might lead to?
Right. I mean, right up there as the number one priority of the US, in addition to supporting Israel, is trying to keep a lid on a regional escalation. What you've seen since the very beginning, since the Hamas attacks of October 7th, has been Iran's proxies across the region, their so-called axis of resistance, firing off in various theaters. So you have the Houthis from Yemen launching attacks on shipping in the Red Sea. The Houthis have claimed that this is in support of the Palestinians and that they're harassing Israeli and US ships in the region, but many of the ships that they have attacked have absolutely no ties to Israel or the US. So you have the UK and the US launching strikes there to respond to that. You've got Israeli-backed militants in Iraq and Syria launching attacks on US interests there and US personnel, with 3 killed a couple of weekends ago. So a lot of tension across the region, and the US is trying to carefully walk a fine line by keeping a lid on it without provoking a further escalation.
Just finally and briefly on that, David, it sounds horrendously complex. We know that, but it sounds even more so now, everything Amy's describing there.
Yeah, and I think to be less kind to Washington, I think the Americans have been quite duplicitous in all of this, on the one hand calling for ceasefires, calling for a reining in of Israel, while at the same time, frankly, supplying those weapons, But Biden's biggest fear right now will be keeping a lid on this regional escalation. And I think the Americans have been very cautious about that. But until they resolve the situation in Gaza, you're not going to be able to take the sting out of the fire, out of this very explosive situation.
David, Amy, thank you both for joining us in Scotland tonight.